I'm Jason, I'm 22, and on the day of my college graduation, my entire family skipped the ceremony to live stream their luxury vacation. A trip to celebrate my twin brother. Before I tell you how a single phone call exposed a $340,000 betrayal and brought their world crashing down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The morning started with a kind of nervous hope that felt like butterflies in my stomach. I woke up before my alarm, the sunlight already filtering through the blinds of my small off-campus apartment. This was the day. The finish line. I carefully ironed my one good dress shirt, making sure the collar was perfect. I laid out the thank you gifts I'd bought for them on my small desk. For my dad, Robert, a heavy, leather-bound book on the history of architecture, a nod to his own career as a developer. For my mom, Ellen, an elegant fountain pen, because she always said she loved writing letters. They were small tokens, but they were all I could afford, and they were filled with 4 years of gratitude I was desperate to express. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie I rarely wore. I imagined the moment my dad would see me in my cap and gown. I pictured him giving me that rare, approving nod, maybe even clapping me on the shoulder and saying, "You did it, son." I pictured my mom tearing up, just like I'd seen other moms do. I wasn't asking for a parade. I was just asking for a moment. One moment where I felt seen. It was that hope that carried me to the stadium. It was a perfect May afternoon, the kind of day that feels like a promise. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the electric buzz of 1,000 futures about to begin. My graduation gown felt heavy, a scratchy, symbolic weight I'd worked 4 long, hard years to earn. I'd gotten there an hour early, found the perfect spot in the stands right by the aisle, and laid out 4 laminated signs on 4 empty, sun-warmed metal chairs. Dad, Mom, Mark, Aunt Carol. I'd called them the night before. The ceremony starts at 2, but you should probably get here by 1 to get good seats, I'd said, my voice tight with excitement. "We'll be there, honey. Wouldn't miss it for the world." My mother had chirped, her voice a little distant. My father was more direct. "Just text me when you see us. We'll find you." My twin brother, Mark, who had graduated from his own college a week earlier, just laughed. "Dude, I just did this. Pro tip. Try not to trip on stage. It's a bad look." So I waited. I watched other families arrive. A vibrant sea of smiling faces and camera flashes. Fathers who looked like my father slapped their sons on the back. Mothers who looked like my mother straightened their children's caps and wiped away proud tears. I watched them all, a spectator to a joy that felt universal, yet completely out of my reach. I kept checking my phone, my thumb hovering over their contact names. No texts, no calls. The clock ticked past 1, then 1:30. With every passing minute, the knot in my stomach tightened. By 1:45, it felt like a cold, heavy stone. The procession started. The organ music swelled. I had to leave the empty chairs and join the sea of black gowns. I marched with my classmates onto the field, my head on a swivel, my eyes desperately scanning the packed stands for a familiar face. A wave. Anything. There was nothing. Just a blur of strangers, all there for someone else. The student announced before me was named Sarah Jenkins. When her name was called, a huge section of the crowd erupted. Air horns, cheers, people screaming, "That's our girl." I saw a man who must have been her father, pounding his chest with pride. I felt a pang of envy so sharp it almost took my breath away. Then my turn. Jason Carter. Summa cum laude. My name echoed through the massive stadium. The honor, the highest you can achieve, felt hollow. I walked across the stage, my steps feeling heavy and loud in the sudden lull. I shook the dean's hand. I accepted the diploma, the smooth paper a stark contrast to the rough gown. The applause was polite, generic, a distant roar for a stranger. From the section where my family was supposed to be, there was only a cavernous silence. In that moment, surrounded by thousands of people, I had never felt so alone. I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt like a ghost at my own celebration. After the ceremony, while others were lost in a joyous storm of hugs and family photos, I found a quiet bench under an old oak tree, far from the crowds. I took off my cap and set it beside me. The humiliation felt hot on my cheeks. I pulled out my phone, thinking maybe I'd call them. Maybe there was a good reason. A flat tire. An emergency. My finger hovered over my mom's name. But I didn't have to call. A notification popped up. A red square with a familiar face. Ellen Carter is live. My finger trembled as I tapped it. The screen filled with a scene of blinding white sand and impossibly turquoise water. My mother was holding the phone selfie style. Her face tanned and beaming, sunglasses perched on her head. My father was beside her, a cocktail in his hand, grinning at the camera. And there was Mark, giving a thumbs up from a jet ski, carving a white wake in the blue water. His girlfriend, Tiffany, was shrieking with laughter behind him. My Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, waved from a lounge chair, a wide-brimmed hat on her head. The comments were scrolling by quickly. OMG! Looks amazing! You guys deserve it! Best parents ever! Then I saw the caption my mother had typed at the bottom of the screen. The words felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Celebrating our son's achievement. So proud of our graduate. They hadn't just forgotten. They hadn't been in an accident. They had chosen. They had chosen to be on a luxury vacation, celebrating my brother's graduation from last week, on the exact day of mine. They were celebrating their son. The right son. My throat closed up. My vision blurred. It was a public declaration, broadcast to all their friends and family, that my graduation, my 4 years of work, my summa cum laude, my entire existence, was so insignificant it wasn't even worth a text message. It was just an inconvenient scheduling conflict with my brother's ongoing victory lap. As I sat there, frozen, the world tilting on its axis, my phone vibrated again. The live stream vanished, replaced by an incoming call. It was a name that had always been a source of comfort, a safe harbor in the quiet storm of my family. Grandpa Henry. I swiped to answer, trying to force my voice to sound normal, to hide the fact that my world had just been shattered into a million pieces. Jason, my boy, congratulations. Grandpa Henry's voice was a warm, booming sound, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in my bones. For a second, I felt a wave of relief. He was the one person who never forgot. He was my anchor. Hey, Grandpa. Thanks. I managed, but my voice cracked on the last word, betraying the calm I was trying to project. I'm so proud of you, son. He continued, oblivious to my turmoil. I called your academic advisor last week, Dr. Sharma. She told me you were graduating summa cum laude. Highest honors, Jason. That's incredible. A real achievement. Did you get the gift I sent? A little something to start you off right. The gift? I asked, my mind still stuck on the image of my family on that beach. Just a little something, he said cheerfully. But as he spoke, my mind, as if unlocked by his kindness, started flashing back. I realized with a sickening certainty that the cruelty of today wasn't a shocking new event. It was the predictable, soul-crushing season finale of a show that had been running my entire life. The pattern was always the same. My mind jumped back to my 10th birthday. Our birthdays are in the same week, Mark's and mine, and they were always a study in contrasts. Mark, the athlete, the social butterfly, got the big party. That year, it was at the new laser tag arena, a place that smelled of ozone and teenage sweat. 20 of his friends were there, a loud, chaotic pack of boys. His main gift was a gleaming new Trek mountain bike with shock absorbers and 21 gears, a machine that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. He paraded it around the backyard like a king showing off his new steed. My celebration was a quiet family dinner at home a few days later. My gift was a beautifully bound 20-volume set of the World Book Encyclopedia. I loved to read, I truly did, but even at 10, I understood the glaring difference in value and effort. I saw the price tag still on the bike, $500. My encyclopedias felt heavy and old. When my dad saw my less-than-enthusiastic face, he nudged me. Say thank you to your mother, Jason. My mother, Ellen, knelt beside me, her voice a soft, placating whisper. It's just that Mark is more of an outdoors kid, honey. You're the smart one. This suits you. She framed it as a compliment, a recognition of my unique intelligence. But it felt like a label, a box. He was the fun one. I was the serious one. He got experiences. I got objects. It was the first time I felt like a consolation prize. The memories kept coming, faster now. My mind skipped forward to high school. Senior year. It was the biggest day of my academic life. The state debate championship finals. I was the captain of the team, and we'd fought our way through 5 rounds to get there. It happened to fall on the same Saturday as Mark's final regular season football game. It wasn't a playoff game, not a championship. It was a meaningless game against a team with a losing record. There was no discussion in our house. No debate. It was a foregone conclusion where my parents would be. We have to be there for Mark's senior game, my dad announced at dinner a week before. It's important. I remember looking at my mom, hoping she'd argue for me, but she just nodded in agreement. Of course, dear. Jason understands. I didn't understand. I stood on that stage in a stuffy auditorium, my heart pounding, my topic ironically being the ethical responsibilities of leadership. I delivered the winning argument, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't feel inside. And when they announced my name as the state champion, I looked out at the audience. On one side, my opponent's family erupted in supportive cheers, even in defeat. On my side, there was just one person I knew, my academic advisor, Dr. Anya Sharma. She had been my mentor for 4 years, the one teacher who saw my potential and pushed me. She was the one who stood up and clapped, a solitary, defiant sound in the quiet hall. Afterward, she gave me a hug that felt more parental than anything I'd felt from my own parents in years. "Don't you ever let anyone make you doubt this moment, Jason," she'd said, her eyes seeing right through the brave face I was trying to put on. "You earned this, every bit of it." My parents called me later that night. I was in my room, the trophy on my desk feeling cold and foreign. "We won!" my dad shouted into the phone, the sounds of a crowded restaurant in the background. "Mark played great. 2 touchdowns." "I won too, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm the state champion." "Oh, that's great, son. Knew you had it in you," he said, his voice distracted. "Anyway, we're taking Mark and the team out for steak to celebrate. Talk to you later." Click. I was so lost in the painful reel of memories that I almost missed what Grandpa Henry was saying now, his voice pulling me back to the bench under the oak tree. "So I figured that should cover your books and any extra expenses. Give you a little breathing room." I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my head. "Sorry, Grandpa. What were you saying about expenses?" "The college fund, Jason," he repeated. And now I could hear a faint hint of confusion in his voice. "The $5,000 a month I've been sending. I hope that's been enough to get you by without having to worry too much." The world stopped. The buzzing of the insects, the distant shouts of other graduates. It all faded into a dull, roaring hum in my ears. I felt a strange sense of vertigo, as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly disappeared. I must have misheard him. "Allowance." My voice was a choked whisper. What allowance?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "Grandpa, I've never received any allowance from you. Not a penny." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence that stretched for 5, then 10 seconds. It was so quiet I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him take a slow, deliberate breath, the kind of breath a man takes before he delivers terrible news. "Jason," he said, and his voice had completely changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp, like honed steel. "Tell me exactly what you mean." "I mean I've never gotten any money," I said, my heart starting to pound in a new, terrifying rhythm. My own voice sounded distant to me. "I've been working a part-time job at the campus library, 20 hours a week since sophomore year, just to pay for my books and food." I thought you and Dad had a falling out about money years ago." That's what he told me. Another memory, sharp and vivid, stabbed me. It was from freshman year, right after I'd arrived at college. I was overwhelmed by the cost of the required textbooks for my architecture program. Nearly $1,000. I'd called home, stressed and embarrassed, to ask for help. My dad had been dismissive, almost annoyed. "You got a scholarship, didn't you? That should cover it. You need to learn to budget, Jason. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Your brother isn't asking us for anything." And I'd believed him. I'd felt a hot flush of shame for asking, for being a burden. So I buckled down. I got the job at the library, shelving books in the dusty archives until midnight. I learned to live on instant ramen and cheap coffee. My social life was non-existent. While other students went on weekend trips or out to dinner, I was working. I saw Mark's life through the distorted lens of social media. A lavish spring break trip to Cancun with Tiffany, a new-looking used Mustang for his 21st birthday, expensive seats at pro football games. I just assumed he was being irresponsible, racking up a mountain of credit card debt that my dad would eventually angrily have to bail him out of. I felt a strange, smug sense of superiority, telling myself that I was the responsible one, the one building character, the one who understood the value of $1. The truth was, I was an idiot, a blind, trusting fool. "Jason, are you listening to me?" Grandpa Henry's voice was sharp now, cutting through the fog of my self-recrimination. "Yes, Grandpa. I'm here. I want you to listen very carefully. When you and Mark were born, I set up a trust fund, an inheritance for my grandsons. When you both started college, I gave your father, as the trustee, specific written instructions. I instructed the bank to wire $5,000 to each of you on the 1st of every month. The money was to be deposited into 2 separate sub-accounts he managed, one for you, one for Mark. It was for your college expenses, your food, your books, your housing. That's $60,000 a year for each of you, for 4 years. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. My mind was scrambling, trying to calculate, trying to comprehend the scale of it. "That's $240,000, Jason," he said, his voice grim. "Per twin." My breath hitched. $250,000. It was a sum so vast it felt like a fantasy. An entire life, lived on a shoestring budget, flashed before my eyes. All the missed opportunities, all the stress, all the worry. It had all been unnecessary. It had all been a lie. But he wasn't finished. "And for your graduation," he continued, his voice now dangerously low, a controlled fury. "As a final gift from the trust before you took full control of the principal, I wired a gift 2 weeks ago. $50,000. To the account for Jason Carter." He paused. "And $50,000 to the account for Mark Carter. That's another $100,000 total." I leaned forward, putting my head in my hands, the rough fabric of my graduation gown scratching my face. The diploma on the bench beside me suddenly felt like a worthless piece of paper. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible. 240,000 plus 50,000. $340,000 if you counted the gift for Mark, which was no doubt already spent. My money, my college fund, my graduation gift, my inheritance, and my parents, my own mother and father, had taken it. All of it. The puzzle pieces all clicked into place with a sickening finality. Their dismissiveness, my dad's lectures about budgeting, Mark's carefree lifestyle, the luxury vacation. It was all funded by me. I wasn't just the forgotten son. I was the family bank. "Jason," Grandpa Henry said, his voice pulling me back to the hellish present. "As you know, I was a lawyer for 40 years. I specialized in corporate finance and fraud. I know a criminal conspiracy when I see one. This isn't just a family disagreement. This is grand larceny. This is a felony." I stood up, the phone still pressed hard against my ear. The feeling of being a victim, of being invisible and powerless, was evaporating, burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. My grief was crystallizing into something hard and sharp. I wasn't just a forgotten son anymore. I wasn't a charity case. I was a creditor, and it was time to collect. I drove home from the graduation ceremony in a silent, white-hot fury. The familiar streets of my hometown looked alien, like a set for a movie I was no longer a part of. My small, beat-up 2008 Toyota felt like a joke, a rolling symbol of the lie I'd been living. Every pothole was a reminder of the repairs I'd put off. Every squeak of the brakes a testament to the money I never had. My money. I parked in the driveway of my parents' house. A large, custom-built home in the city's most affluent neighborhood. A house I now saw not as a home, but as a crime scene, funded by my stolen future. It was empty, of course. They were still on their private beach, sipping cocktails bought with my inheritance. I walked inside. The air was still and quiet, smelling faintly of my mother's expensive scented candles. On the polished mahogany of the dining room table, sitting exactly where I'd left them, were the two neatly wrapped gifts. The first edition book for my dad. The beautiful fountain pen for my mom. Thank you gifts. The irony was so bitter it made my stomach churn. I wanted to smash them, to tear them to shreds. But I didn't. I left them there as a silent testament to the fool I had been. I sank onto the plush, cream-colored couch in the living room, my mind a chaotic storm of numbers and betrayals. How could they do it? It wasn't just the theft. It was the intimacy of the deception. How many times had my mother hugged me, her voice full of fake sympathy, and said, "I know it's hard, honey, but you're learning such valuable lessons." How many times had my father looked me in the eye and lectured me on the importance of integrity and hard work, all while knowing he was bleeding my trust fund dry. I pulled out my phone, my thumb scrolling numbly through social media. I was looking for something, I didn't know what. More evidence of their lies, maybe. A way to make the betrayal feel more real. And then I found it. It was worse than the live stream. So much worse. It was a video posted by Mark's girlfriend, Tiffany, just an hour ago. The camera was shaky, filled with her excited squeals that grated on my raw nerves. "Oh my God, baby, is it really yours? Seriously?" The camera panned to show my brother, Mark, leaning casually against a gleaming, silver Porsche 911. It wasn't just a new car. It was an $80,000 declaration of status, a middle finger to my entire existence. He had that easy, confident smile on his face, the one he always wore, the one that said the world belonged to him and he deserved every piece of it. "Happy graduation to me," he said, dangling the keys with the iconic Porsche crest in front of the camera. "My parents are the best. They said my big promotion at the firm deserved a real reward." Promotion. Another lie layered on top of all the others. Mark had an entry-level job at a mid-tier marketing firm. He wasn't getting a promotion. He was spending my graduation money, $80,000. That single car, a toy for my brother, was nearly a quarter of my stolen inheritance. That was the moment the hurt died. The sadness didn't just curdle. It flash froze and shattered into a million sharp, angry pieces. This wasn't a passive crime anymore. This was active, gloating theft. They hadn't just taken the money. They had converted it into a monument of their preference for him over me. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. I dialed Grandpa Henry's number again. He answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. "Grandpa," I said, and my voice was different now. The tremble was gone. The sadness was gone. All that remained was a cold, flat calm that scared even me. "It's worse than we thought." "What is it, Jason?" His voice was steady, ready. "They bought Mark a Porsche. A brand new, $80,000 Porsche. He posted a video of it an hour ago, bragging about it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind, the tumblers of a complex safe clicking into place. When he spoke, his voice was the calmest I had ever heard it. It was the voice of a man who had seen the enemy, calculated the odds, and was preparing for a very specific, very precise war. "That's not just evidence, Jason," he said softly. "That's a signed confession. They're arrogant. They're sloppy. They think they're untouchable. And that, right there, is how we're going to bring them down." "What do we do?" I asked, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "Do I confront them? Do I send them the video? Do I call the police and report the car stolen?" "No," he said firmly, his voice cutting through my chaotic thoughts. "You do nothing. Absolutely nothing. You don't call them. You don't text them. You don't answer if they contact you. Starting right now, to them you are a ghost. An angry, vengeful ghost, but a ghost nonetheless. Let them enjoy their vacation. Let them post their pictures. Let them feel secure in their little kingdom of lies. Every smug photo they post is another nail in their own coffin. And you? I asked, my pacing slowing as his strategy began to take shape in my mind. Me? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I'm coming out of retirement. I spent 40 years as a lawyer dealing with corporate sharks, sophisticated con artists, and embezzlers. I never thought I'd have to use those skills on my own family, but here we are. This is not a family squabble anymore, Jason. We are not going to yell. We are not going to have a dramatic, tearful confrontation. That's what they expect. That's a battle we would lose. They would gaslight you, call you ungrateful, and turn it all around on you. He was right. I could already hear my mother's tearful defense, my father's booming indignation. No, Grandpa continued. We are going to launch a quiet, methodical legal operation. Loud anger is a firework. It's bright, it's noisy, and then it's gone. Cold, calculated justice. That's a glacier. It's slow, it's silent, it's unstoppable, and it grinds entire mountains into dust. We are going to build a case so solid, so irrefutable, that they will have no choice but to surrender. His words were a lifeline. They gave my rage a structure, a purpose. Okay, Grandpa, I said, my voice steady for the first time since that morning. I looked at the Porsche keys dangling on the screen of my phone. Tell me the plan. The plan is simple, he replied. First, I gather the ammunition. Every bank statement, every wire transfer confirmation, every letter I ever sent with instructions for your trust. I will build a fortress of paper. Second, we identify their greatest vulnerability. And third, he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. We don't just ask for the money back. We take back your power, your name, and your future. We are going to dismantle the world they built with your money, piece by piece. I hung up the phone. I walked through the silent house, a stranger in the place I grew up. I went into my old room, a room that still had my high school debate trophies on the shelf. I packed a single bag with the few things that mattered, and I walked out of that house without looking back. The war had begun. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in patience and strategy. I moved into Grandpa Henry's guest room, a quiet, book-lined space that felt more like a sanctuary than a temporary home. The walls were covered in framed maps and photos from his travels, a testament to a life lived deliberately. It was the antithesis of my parents' house, which was decorated for show. As he'd instructed, I went completely dark. I blocked my parents, Mark, and Aunt Carol on my phone and all social media. To them, I had simply vanished off the face of the earth. I imagined their eventual return from vacation, their mild annoyance turning to confusion, maybe even a flicker of concern. It gave me a grim satisfaction. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of quiet, focused activity. His study, normally a place for reading and quiet contemplation, was transformed into a war room. The large mahogany desk, usually clear except for a single lamp and a book, was soon covered in neat stacks of documents secured by rubber bands. Bank statements going back 4 years. Wire confirmations. Copies of the original trust agreement he'd drafted over 2 decades ago, its pages yellowed with age. He used a ruler and a yellow highlighter, marking every line item that was relevant. The words inheritance, college fund, fiduciary duty, and in trust for Jason Carter became a repeating, damning chorus in yellow ink. But watching him work wasn't enough for me. My anger, once a raging fire, had cooled into a focused, humming engine. It needed an outlet, a purpose. I couldn't just be the victim waiting for rescue. I needed to be a soldier in my own army. What's their biggest vulnerability? I asked him one evening as he was poring over a spreadsheet. He looked up, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. It's always the same with men like your father, he said. It's not money, it's reputation. Robert has built an image of himself as an untouchable, shrewd, but honest pillar of the business community. His entire business model is built on trust and handshakes with powerful people. If that trust is broken, the whole house of cards comes down. That was all I needed to hear. I spent my days at the public library, using their computers to dig into my father's business empire. I learned the names of his partners, the structure of his LLCs, and the status of his current projects. His biggest partner, by far, was a man named David Davies, a sharp, old-school investor with a legendary reputation for integrity. I read articles about him. He was self-made, valued loyalty, and had a zero-tolerance policy for shady dealings. I discovered that he and my father were in the final stages of closing a massive $50 million deal, a luxury resort development that would be the crown jewel of my father's career. That was it. That was the jugular. One afternoon, I was in the study, cross-referencing a list of my father's business partners with public records of political donations, when Grandpa walked in. He held a single sheet of paper, and on his face was a look of grim triumph. "We have our first breakthrough," he said. "I've used my old law firm's resources to schedule a formal deposition with their financial advisor, Frank Miller. He can try to stonewall, but he's legally compelled to attend." "Will he talk?" I asked, my heart quickening. "He's been on my dad's payroll for 15 years. "He'll talk," Grandpa said, his eyes glinting, "because a man like Frank Miller is more afraid of going to prison than he is of your father. And I'm going to make it very clear to him that those are his only two options." The meeting, or deposition, as Grandpa legally termed it, took place 2 days later in a sterile, impersonal conference room at a neutral law office downtown. A court reporter was present, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to create a sworn transcript. Frank Miller was a small, nervous man in an ill-fitting suit. He kept wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers and wouldn't make eye contact with either of us. Grandpa began, his voice calm, professional, and utterly disarming. "Frank, thank you for coming. We're not here to cause trouble. We are simply here, on the record, to clarify a potential accounting discrepancy." He slid a thick, bound document across the polished table. "This is a complete record of all transfers from my personal accounts to the Carter Family Trust, specifically to the sub-account designated for Jason Carter. As you can see, it totals $290,000 over 4 years. Jason is sitting right here. He has, on the record, stated he has not received any of these funds. Can you, as the financial advisor who managed these accounts, explain that discrepancy?" Frank stammered, his eyes darting between Grandpa and me. I just follow Robert's instructions. He's the trustee. I'm not responsible for how he allocates the funds." "I understand that," Grandpa said, leaning forward, his voice hardening slightly. "But you are not just a bookkeeper, Frank. As a certified financial advisor, you have a fiduciary duty, a legal and ethical responsibility to act in the best interest of the beneficiary. When a client, a trustee, instructs you to do something that is potentially fraudulent, like, for instance, diverting funds from one beneficiary's account to another's without documentation, you have an obligation to question it, to document your concerns, to file a formal objection. Did you do any of those things, Frank?" Frank paled, the color draining from his face. "Robert," he said, "it was just a family matter, a way to manage the boys' finances more efficiently. He said it was all temporary. For 4 years." I asked, speaking for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Frank flinched. "Did you really believe it was efficient to manage my finances by giving all my money to my brother? Did you see the paperwork for the $80,000 Porsche he just bought? Did that seem efficient to you?" The directness of the question, the use of the specific item, seemed to shatter his composure. He slumped in his chair, a defeated man. "Look," he finally whispered, his eyes pleading now. "I didn't feel right about it. I really didn't. Robert can be a very persuasive, very intimidating. And Ellen." He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to absolve himself. "What about Ellen?" Grandpa prodded gently, like a fisherman giving a fish just a little more line. This was the moment Frank chose to save himself, to throw everyone else under the bus to save his own skin. She was hesitant at first, he said, the words spilling out in a rush now. When Robert first proposed consolidating the funds, for simplicity, she was worried. I was on the speakerphone call, she said. But Robert, the trust is clear. It's supposed to be separate. But then her sister, Carol, was there with them. She jumped in. Frank looked at me, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. Carol said, and I'll never forget it, she said, "Oh, Ellen, don't be so dramatic. You're doing the right thing. You have to protect Mark's future. He's the one who's going to carry on the family name in business. He needs this kind of support to get ahead in this world." Then she laughed and said, "Jason's the strong one, the independent one. He's always been fine on his own. He'll be fine." After that, after Carol gave her that excuse, Ellen was fully on board. She never questioned it again. I felt a fresh wave of sickness wash over me. It was colder and deeper than the anger. Aunt Carol. Sweet, doting Aunt Carol, who always sent me a $10 bill in a birthday card. She wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't an enabler. She was the architect of the betrayal. She had provided the twisted moral justification, the poison that allowed my mother to rob her own son and sleep at night. Grandpa nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Thank you, Frank. Your cooperation has been noted in the official transcript." He slid a pre-written affidavit across the table. "This summarizes our conversation. Sign it and you will be listed as a witness for the prosecution. Refuse and you'll be listed as a co-conspirator. The choice is yours." Frank snatched the pen and signed it without even reading it. As we walked out of the law office into the bright afternoon sun, I felt no triumph, just a grim, chilling clarity. The enemy wasn't just my parents' greed. It was a quiet, insidious conspiracy born out of jealousy and a twisted definition of love, whispered over a phone call by my own aunt. "Now we have them," Grandpa said, patting the folder containing the sworn affidavit. "And now we set the stage for the final act." The final act arrived not with a dramatic bang, but with the quiet, official rustle of a legal courier's envelope. Grandpa Henry, a master of psychological warfare, didn't call or text. He had a process server deliver a formal letter to my father's gleaming corporate office. I saw the draft. It was a masterpiece of understated menace, every word chosen for maximum impact. It read, "Robert, this letter serves as a formal and non-negotiable request for an immediate family meeting to discuss serious financial and fiduciary discrepancies in your administration of the Carter Family Trust, specifically regarding the funds designated for the beneficiary, Jason Carter. This meeting will take place at your residence this coming Saturday at 7 p.m. Please ensure all relevant parties, including Ellen Carter, Mark Carter, and Carol Price, are present. Failure to comply will result in this matter being escalated immediately to the district attorney's office on charges of fraud and felony embezzlement." It was a summons, not an invitation. It gave my father no room to maneuver, no space to lie or deflect. To refuse would be an immediate admission of guilt. He was cornered, and Grandpa knew exactly how a man like my father would react to being cornered. He would try to project power. His response was predictable, a perfect display of his breathtaking arrogance. He called Grandpa Henry's personal cell phone within the hour. His voice, Grandpa later told me, was dripping with a false, hearty bonhomie. "Henry, got your letter. A bit dramatic, don't you think, with all the legal jargon? Of course, we can chat. It's a simple misunderstanding. In fact, why don't you and Jason come for dinner on Saturday? We'll have a nice meal. I've invited David Davies and his wife, Clara, to join us. We can have a lovely evening, and then you and I can step into my study and clear up whatever little spreadsheet error this is afterward." It was an audacious power play. He was using his most important business partner, the powerful and respected David Davies, as a human shield. He was creating a social fortress, assuming we wouldn't dare cause a scene in front of such an important guest. He thought it would intimidate us, force us to back down and accept his private, controlled version of events. It was the single biggest mistake of his life. He had just personally invited the star witness of his own public execution. Saturday evening arrived, thick with unspoken tension. I put on a simple dark suit I'd bought from a discount store. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see the heartbroken kid who had stood alone on the graduation field. I saw a man. My expression was calm. My eyes were focused. I was ready. We walked up the stone path to my parents' house right at 7. The door swung open before we could ring the bell. My mother, Ellen, stood there, looking elegant in a silk dress, her face a mask of strained hospitality. My father stood behind her, a broad, fake smile plastered on his face. "Henry, Jason, glad you could make it," my father boomed, clapping Grandpa on the shoulder in a display of camaraderie that made my skin crawl. He glanced at me, his eyes cold. "Good to see you're not hiding away anymore, son." The scene inside was one of carefully curated domestic bliss. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers. The scent of roasted rosemary filled the air. Aunt Carol was there, of course, fussing over the flower arrangements, her face a picture of innocence. Mark stood awkwardly by the massive stone fireplace, sipping a bourbon and refusing to meet my eyes. And then there was the center of my father's strategy, David Davies and his elegant wife, Clara. Mr. Davies was a distinguished-looking man with a full head of silver hair and sharp, intelligent blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He shook Grandpa's hand warmly and my hand firmly, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. Dinner was an exercise in masterful hypocrisy. The conversation was a minefield of small talk and veiled insults. My mother kept trying to recount amusing anecdotes from their marvelous trip. Aunt Carol kept chiming in, praising Mark's incredible new job promotion, and how he was a real go-getter, just like his father. Through it all, I remained almost completely silent. I ate my food, listened, and whenever my father shot a challenging look my way, I met his gaze with a calm, steady look of my own. I could feel his frustration mounting. He wanted me to be sullen, to be angry, to cause a scene and prove myself to be the unstable, ungrateful son he'd likely described me as. I refused to give him the satisfaction. My silence was my weapon. It was making them all deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared. My father leaned back in his chair, the picture of a benevolent patriarch in full control of his domain. "Well," he said with a theatrical sigh, "now that we've had a lovely meal, Henry, perhaps you and I can step into my study and sort out your little financial concerns." "There's no need for that, Robert," Grandpa said. His voice was quiet, but it had a new edge to it, a resonance that cut through the clinking of coffee cups and made everyone at the table fall silent. He placed his old, worn leather briefcase on the table and opened it. The soft clicks of the latches sounded like gunshots in the suddenly silent room. "Everything can, and should, be discussed right here." My father's smile faltered. His eyes darted nervously toward Mr. Davies. "Henry, I really don't think this is the time or the place." "On the contrary," Grandpa interrupted smoothly, his eyes sweeping the table, "I think this is the perfect time, and the perfect place. Business and family are so often intertwined, after all." He looked directly at David Davies as he said it. He pulled out the thick, bound folder from our deposition and laid it on the table. "This," he began, his voice clear and precise, "is a copy of your fiduciary agreement for the Carter Family Trust. And these," he said, laying out document after document in a neat, damning row, "are the bank statements showing monthly transfers of $5,000 for 48 consecutive months, designated specifically for Jason Carter's college fund." My mother's face went white as a sheet. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Mark stared at the papers, his face a mask of dawning horror. "And this," Grandpa continued, his voice like ice, "is the confirmation of a $50,000 wire transfer, a graduation gift, also designated for Jason." He paused, letting the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. "That is a grand total of $340,000. Jason, as you know, has not seen a single cent of it." Robert finally exploded, his face turning a blotchy, dangerous shade of red. "This is an outrage. This is a private family matter. How dare you bring this up in front of our guests? This is a private matter." "It stopped being a private matter, Robert, the moment you committed a felony," Grandpa said coldly. "And it stopped being a family matter the moment you involved your financial advisor, who has provided a sworn affidavit detailing your instructions to divert the funds." He tapped the folder. "It's all in here." David Davies sat perfectly still, like a statue. His sharp blue eyes moved from the papers on the table, to my father's contorted face, and finally to me. He hadn't said a word, but his silent, analytical presence was a more powerful judgment than any outburst could ever be. His wife, Clara, placed a calming hand on his arm, her expression one of quiet shock and disgust. My father, his legal defense obliterated, turned on me as his last resort. It was all he had left. "And you," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger, "running to your grandfather like a little coward. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a home. We paid for your life." I looked at him, and the last vestiges of fear and hurt inside me finally dissolved. All I felt was a profound, weary sadness for this small, pathetic man. "Done for me?" I asked, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent table. "All I ever wanted was for you to show up. That's it. I didn't care about the money. I would have been happy with a phone call on my graduation day. I would have been happy if you had just been there, sitting in one of those empty chairs." I stood up, my own chair scraping against the floor, my eyes locked with his. "But you weren't just absent. You were thieves. You smiled in my face and lectured me about responsibility while you stole my future." I turned my gaze to my brother, who looked like he was about to be sick. "That Porsche you're so proud of? That car you bragged about all over the internet? You're driving my graduation gift. You're driving 4 years of my hard work." The color drained from Mark's face. He looked from me, to the shiny car keys sitting on the kitchen counter, to our parents. The entire, gilded reality of his life was shattering around him in real time. My mother started to cry, a soft, whimpering sound that garnered no sympathy. "We were only trying to help Mark get a good start. We were going to pay you back. We always intended to. Pay me back." I laughed, a short, harsh, humorless sound. "You've been lying to me my entire life. The lies, all of them, stop tonight." That was when David Davies finally moved. He carefully, deliberately, folded his cloth napkin and placed it on the table beside his plate. He stood up. He didn't look at my father. He looked at Grandpa Henry, then at me, and gave a slow, deliberate nod of respect. "Thank you for dinner, Ellen," he said to my mother, his voice polite but chillingly distant. "Clara, I believe it's time for us to leave." He and his wife walked out of the dining room without a backward glance. The soft, final click of the front door closing behind them was the sound of my father's world ending. He hadn't just lost a deal. He had lost his reputation, his power, and his shield, all in front of his own family. He was exposed, and he was utterly, completely alone. The departure of David Davies sucked all the air and life out of the room. It was like a vital support beam had been kicked out, and the entire structure of my family's life was groaning, about to collapse. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, broken only by my mother's pathetic, gulping sobs. My father stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. The bravado, the arrogance, the patriarchal control. It had all been stripped away, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man I barely recognized. He finally turned on Grandpa Henry, his voice a low, trembling hiss. "You've ruined me. You've destroyed my business. You did this to your own family." "No, Robert," Grandpa replied, calmly and methodically packing his documents back into his briefcase. He snapped the latches shut with a sound of finality. "You did this. You made a series of choices, hundreds of them over 4 years. Now you are facing the consequences. This isn't a family drama anymore. This is a legal proceeding. My lawyer, not me, will be in contact with your lawyer on Monday morning to arrange the full and immediate repayment of the $340,000. plus 4 years of accrued interest. If you refuse or delay in any way, we will proceed with filing the criminal charges we have prepared with the district attorney's office. The charges are fraud, felony embezzlement, and misappropriation of trust funds. The words criminal charges hung in the air like a death sentence. My father, a man who had built his life on the foundation of his public reputation and social standing, flinched as if he'd been physically struck. The thought of his name in a police blotter, of a mugshot, of his carefully curated friends reading about his arrest in the local paper, it was clearly a horror beyond his comprehension. But the most significant confrontation, the one that truly signaled the end of our family as it was yet to come. Mark, who had been silent and ashen-faced throughout the entire exchange, finally found his voice. He pushed himself away from the fireplace and walked toward our parents. His expression was a raw, chaotic mixture of hurt, disgust, and dawning self-awareness. "A Porsche?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You told me it was a reward for my promotion. You made me call Grandpa and tell him about my promotion. There was no promotion, was there? It was all a lie." "Mark, honey, we did it for you," my mother pleaded, reaching for his hand. She needed an ally, and she was desperately trying to claim her golden child back. "We only ever wanted you to have the best of everything." He pulled his hand away as if her touch had burned him. "For me," he said, his voice rising, gaining a strength I had never heard from him before. "You did this to me. You made me a part of your lie. You made me your smiling, unknowing accomplice. Every time I drove that car, every time I accepted an expensive gift, every time I bragged to my friends I was spending my brother's money. You didn't just steal from him, you turned me into a thief. You made me look like a monster." He turned to me then, and for the first time in my life I didn't see my rival or my parents' favorite. I saw my brother, my twin, and his eyes were filled with a genuine, soul-crushing remorse that was more powerful than any apology. "How could you?" he asked our parents, his voice breaking on the final word. "He's your son. He's my brother." Without another word, he walked into the kitchen, snatched the Porsche keys from the marble countertop, and strode to the front door. He didn't slam it. He closed it quietly behind him, a sound of such deliberate finality that it was more devastating than any angry outburst could ever have been. The perfect family was irrevocably, undeniably broken. The days that followed were a blur of cold, efficient legal activity. My father, stripped of all his bravado, hired a top-tier, and no doubt incredibly expensive lawyer. But there was no fight. The evidence, the sworn affidavit from Frank Miller, the pristine paper trail, the public flaunting of the Porsche, was too overwhelming. The threat of public, criminal charges, coupled with the silent, deadly threat of my mother filing for divorce to save herself from the legal fallout, was enough. My mother, completely broken and advised by her own newly hired lawyer, agreed to whatever was necessary to avoid a public spectacle. The first casualty of their capitulation was the Porsche. Mark drove it to a dealership the next day and handed the keys over to a consignment manager. The money from its sale was immediately transferred to an escrow account managed by the lawyers. The next was the luxury vacation home in Florida, the one where they had so happily live-streamed their betrayal. It went on the market and was sold within 2 weeks to a cash buyer, likely for less than it was worth. The social fallout was just as swift and brutal. The news of David Davies pulling out of the massive resort deal spread like wildfire through the city's tight-knit business community. While the specific details of our family confrontation remained private, the rumors were damning enough. Robert Carter, once a pillar of the community, became a pariah overnight. Long-term business partners canceled meetings. Lifelong friends stopped returning his calls. He and my mother were unceremoniously disinvited from the charity boards they had so proudly served on. They were ostracized, their carefully constructed world of influence and admiration crumbling into dust. A week after the confrontation, Mark showed up at Grandpa Henry's house. He didn't ask to see me. He asked to see Grandpa. I watched from the top of the stairs as he sat in the study, his head in his hands, looking lost and young. He wasn't there to defend his parents. He was there to try and understand the wreckage of his own life. He talked to Grandpa for over an hour, and when he left, he looked less angry, but more heartbroken than ever. One evening, about a month after that horrible dinner, I drove past their house on my way home from the library. The prestigious address no longer held any power. A large for sale sign was staked into the perfectly manicured lawn, a stark, public symbol of their downfall. I could see them through the large picture window, sitting in the dimly lit living room. They weren't talking. They were just two silent, isolated figures in a house that was no longer a home, surrounded by the wreckage of their own choices. There was no satisfaction in the sight. There was no joy in their ruin. There was only a profound, hollow sense of waste. They had traded their son's love, their family's unity, and their own integrity for money and status, and in the end, they had lost it all. A year can change everything. It's a cliché because it's true. The white-hot fury and the bitter sense of betrayal that had fueled me for weeks after the confrontation slowly gave way to something else. Something quieter and more constructive. A clean slate. The money, when it was finally repaid in full, every last cent, plus 4 years of compounded interest that Grandpa's lawyer had ruthlessly calculated, felt less like a victory prize and more like a tool. It was seed capital for a new life, a life I would build on my own terms, with my own hands. My degree, the one I'd earned in that lonely stadium, was in architecture. My whole life, I'd been fascinated by how spaces shape people's lives, how a well-designed building could foster community or a poorly designed one could create isolation. While my father built sterile glass and steel monuments to wealth and ego, I dreamed of creating something different, something with heart, something that mattered. I used a portion of the recovered funds to lease a small, second-floor office space in an old brick building downtown. It wasn't glamorous. The floors creaked, and the windows rattled in the wind, but it was mine. I hung a simple sign in the window, Carter Design Group. I didn't chase the multimillion-dollar contracts my father had. I started small. I submitted proposals for projects that the big firms ignored. I redesigned a local community center, turning a dark, dated space into a bright, welcoming hub. I created innovative, low-cost blueprints for an affordable, sustainable housing project for a local nonprofit. I helped small business owners on a shoestring budget create retail spaces that felt unique and welcoming. It was grueling work. The hours were long, the pay was inconsistent, and the budget was always tight. But for the first time in my life, my work felt completely my own. It was honest. It was real. And it was making a small, tangible difference in my city. Grandpa Henry, with his decades of business acumen, was my unofficial advisor, my mentor, and my biggest cheerleader. He'd come by the office once a week with coffee and donuts and go over my books, offering sage advice. About 6 months into this new venture, my office door creaked open and Mark walked in. I hadn't seen him in person since he had come to talk to Grandpa. He'd sent me a single, long, rambling text message a few months back, full of remorse and shame, which I had acknowledged with a simple "I know. We'll talk eventually." Now here he was. He looked completely different. The easy, unearned confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet humility I'd never seen in him before. He was thinner, and the designer clothes and flashy watch were gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He didn't offer excuses or platitudes. He just stood there for a moment, his hands stuffed in his pockets, looking around my small, cluttered office. He looked at the blueprints tacked to the walls, the foam core models on the tables, the stacks of books on the floor. This is really cool, Jason," he said softly, his voice a little hoarse. "What you're building here." "Thanks," I replied, my voice neutral. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I came here to ask you for something," he said, finally meeting my eyes. His were filled with a shame so profound it was startling. "And I know I have absolutely no right to ask you for anything, ever again. But I'm going to ask anyway." I braced myself, my old defenses kicking in. I expected a request for money, for help getting a new job, for some kind of intervention with our parents, who I hadn't spoken to in 6 months. "Can you give me a job?" he asked. The question caught me completely off guard. I just stared at him. He must have mistaken my silence for refusal, because he started talking quickly, tumbling over his words. "I'll do anything. Seriously. I'll sweep the floors, make coffee, run errands, carry supplies. I'll be your intern for free. I don't care. I left my job. I left that whole life. It was all built on a lie anyway. I want to learn how to build something real, with my hands. And I want to try and earn my way back. Not your money, just back." I looked at my brother, really looked at him for the first time as a man, not as my lifelong rival. The entitled golden child was gone. In his place was someone lost, someone trying to find his footing, someone desperately trying to atone. The easy thing would have been for him to disappear, to start a new life somewhere else. The hard thing was this: showing up at his wronged brother's doorstep, humbling himself completely, and offering to do the work. "You can start Monday," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Be here at 8, and I'm going to pay you. Minimum wage. We're laying foundation at the Miller Park Community Housing site. It's hard, dirty work." He nodded, a look of immense, startling relief washing over his face. It was as if I'd lifted a physical weight from his shoulders. "Thank you, Jason," he whispered. "I won't let you down." And he didn't. Mark became the hardest worker I had. He showed up early. He stayed late. He never complained. He did the grunt work, the heavy lifting, the thankless tasks no one else wanted to do. He learned how to read blueprints, how to mix concrete, how to frame a wall. And slowly, painstakingly, over months of shared labor, early mornings, and quiet lunches on the tailgate of my truck, we began to rebuild our relationship. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't have to. We were building a new foundation, not on the fractured, toxic ground of our childhood, but on the solid, shared ground of mutual respect and honest work. One sweltering afternoon, months later, we were sitting on a stack of lumber at a construction site, sharing a bottle of water. "You know," Mark said, staring off at the wooden frame of the house we were building, "I think about that night all the time. The dinner." "Me too," I admitted. "There's something I never told you," he said, turning to face me. "Something I should have said a long time ago. I was so wrapped up in my own shock, but I need you to know the whole truth." He took a breath. "When they were on that trip, I felt weird about it. It seemed like way too much even for them. Mom seemed on edge whenever I talked to her. I remember her saying she was worried about you, about how it would look. And then I heard her on the phone with Aunt Carol. I was in the next room. Mom was whispering, saying something like, 'But Robert, the trust is clear. It's supposed to be separate. What if Jason finds out?' And I heard Aunt Carol's voice on the other end, sharp and clear. He looked me right in the eye, his own filled with the memory of the betrayal. She said, 'Oh, Ellen, don't be so dramatic. You're a mother protecting her son. You're doing the right thing. You have to protect Mark's future. He's the one who's going to carry on the family name in business. He's the one who needs this kind of support to get ahead in this competitive world.' And then she laughed, this little tinkling laugh, and said, 'Jason is different. He's the strong one, the independent one. He's always been fine on his own. He'll be fine. This is what's best for the family.' He shook his head, disgust written all over his face. She didn't just enable them. She wrote the script for them. She gave Mom the justification she needed to sleep at night. She made it sound like they were doing you a favor by robbing you blind." I just nodded, absorbing the final, ugly detail. It wasn't a spontaneous act of greed. It was a calculated decision, rationalized and enabled by the people closest to us. It was a quiet, insidious conspiracy born out of jealousy and a twisted definition of love. But looking at my brother, my employee, my friend, covered in sawdust and sweat, I knew that conspiracy had ultimately failed. They had tried to tear us apart, to build a wall of money and secrets between us. But in the end, their actions had forced us to tear that wall down and build something better in its place. Something real. Last month, I was at the annual City Architectural Awards dinner. It was held in a grand ballroom at a downtown hotel, the kind of opulent place my father used to command like a king in his court. But tonight, I was there not as a son or a guest, but as a nominee. My small underdog firm, Carter Design Group, was a finalist for the Community Impact Award. Our design for the Miller Park Community Center, the project the big firms had scoffed at as being too small, too unprofitable, was being recognized. And we won. As I walked up to the brightly lit podium, my heart was pounding. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't with loneliness or dread. It was with a quiet, solid pride. I looked out at the sea of faces, and at a table right near the front, I saw my team. And sitting with them were Grandpa Henry, looking impossibly proud in his best suit, and Mark, who was clapping so hard his hands were a blur. He was beaming, a genuine, unadulterated smile of joy for his brother's success. I gave my speech. I thanked my team for their tireless work. I thanked my mentor, my grandfather, for his wisdom. And then I looked at my brother and said, and I want to thank my brother, Mark, who taught me that the best way to fix a broken foundation is to build a new one, together. On my way back to my seat, clutching the heavy glass award, my path took me past a table in the far back corner of the room, near the service exit. And sitting there alone were my parents. I hadn't seen them in person in almost 2 years. They hadn't been invited. They had simply bought tickets, hoping, I suppose, to be seen, to reclaim a sliver of their old life. They looked diminished, smaller. My father's expensive suit seemed to hang off his shoulders, and the confident posture I knew so well was gone, replaced by a slight slump. My mother just stared at her plate, her jewelry seeming too bright, too gaudy in the dim light. Our eyes met for a brief second across the crowded room. I saw a flicker of something in my father's eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the bitterness of defeat. My mother just looked away, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hatred was gone. The hurt was a distant, faded scar. They were just two people I used to know. Their opinions, their approval, their very existence, it no longer held any power over me. I had spent so much of my life chasing their validation, and now that I had finally stopped, I realized I didn't need it at all. I had built a life, a career, and a sense of self that they couldn't touch. The real celebration wasn't at the fancy awards dinner. It was an hour later, at a cheap, noisy pizza place down the street that stayed open late. It was just the three of us. Me, Mark, and Grandpa Henry. We were squeezed into a red vinyl booth, the heavy glass award sitting in the middle of the table next to the Parmesan cheese shaker. We were laughing, arguing over the last slice of pepperoni, and talking about the next project. My brother, who had once been handed the keys to a Porsche, was now proudly telling me about how he'd finally mastered a difficult dovetail jointing technique for the cabinets at a client's house. He was going to night school to get his contractor's license. My grandfather, who had once funded our lives from afar, was now here, a constant, grounding presence, sneaking Mark a $20 bill and telling him to take his girlfriend out somewhere nice. I looked at these two men, my real family. I had lost a home built on lies and secrets, but I had gained something unbreakable in its place. My father had spent his entire life building a business empire designed to impress others. But we, in our own quiet, messy way, were building a legacy. It wasn't made of glass and steel, but of honesty, forgiveness, and the simple, powerful truth that the strongest foundations are always the ones you build yourself, with the people you choose to call family. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it has touched you in some way. Have you ever had to find strength in a moment of profound betrayal, or had to rebuild a relationship you thought was lost forever? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like or follow so you don't miss what's next.